I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. The Chinese economy, the Middle Kingdom, the wonder of the world, the growth these last 20 years has empowered, aggrandized the power of faceless and really very well prepared apparatchiks. One of them is Hu Jintao. We've talked about him. Wen Jiabao. These are not significant world leaders. However, because they were standing there when this wall of growth fell on the Chinese people by their own labor and sacrifice, this last 100 years since the open door policy and the exploitation of the Middle Kingdom, these men claim to be leaders. They're not. The leader is called something, it's got initials. It's called GDP. That's the leader of China. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com and the Daily's here with me. Gordon writing in Forbes.com, the GDP is hesitating, Gordon. And all the king's horses and all the Wen Jiabao spin remarks can't turn that story back to growth. What's happened in the Middle Kingdom? What has caught up with them?
What's happened recently is that growth has been slowing, and it's been slowing consistently now for more than a year. But at the same time, inflation has been accelerating. And Beijing says that inflation was 5.3% in April, but it probably was double that. And food inflation, which they said was around 10 to 11%, was double that. That's a big issue when you have the poor who spend about 45% of their disposable income on food are now facing food inflation of something like 20%.
Now, Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao are aging out of Princelingville, and there will be a successor of sorts. That's his problem, and that's his gang's problem. But right now, there's an additional question about this word inflation. The other night, I spoke with James McIntosh, who's the investment editor at the Financial Times in London. We were talking about something fairly abstract, and it seems a little silly when you're comparing it to the needs of a billion point four people, which is gold, the gold bubble. George Soros says his agents sell because there's no threat of deflation, so he's selling his gold holdings. John Paulson, the multi-billionaire who made his money shorting the housing market when everybody else was long, except for Goldman Sachs, they were selling it short at the same time. He says buy gold, and he's got all of his money, his considerable hedge fund in gold because he says inflation's coming. I can't find inflation in America. Neither can Ben Bernanke. Okay. However, Mr. McIntosh does mention that the inflation that John Paulson is buying against is in China and India. We've exported our inflation. Do the Chinese know this? Do the Chinese people know it?
Well, the Chinese people certainly know it because you have the wealthy in Guangdong province in the south. They go to Hong Kong to buy everyday household items. So, essentially what you have are people leaving the country to buy shampoo. That's how serious inflation is.
All right, because we've exported our inflation, and I think that Mr. Bernanke's made some flippant remarks about that's their problem. It is their problem. But my reading of China through your eyes this last year, Gordon, is that if it's a problem in China, it's coming here because of our relations with China and its relations with its neighbors. Traditionally, over these last 60 years of the dictatorship, when China gets in trouble, they get aggressive, don't they?
Well, they certainly get aggressive. And right now they've got economic problems that they can't solve because inflation has now taken hold of the Chinese economy. Everybody says that they navigated their way through the 2008 downturn successfully. Well, no, they didn't. What they did was they stimulated their economy. They overstimulated it. Now they've got inflation. They've got asset bubbles, and they don't know what to do. And as you point out, they've got this political transition, and that means that Premier Wen Jiabao, their premier for economy, is sort of like a short-termer. And he's not really doing anything because he's saying it's not my problem, it's my successor's problem. Well, when his successor gets in, he's going to not have the ability to deal with it because Chinese leaders take about 2 years to consolidate their position, which means that we're not going to see a solution to inflation until 2014, maybe 2015.
I'm told that one of the factors that's driving the price of gold, yes, the dollar's weak. Yes, there is a reason to believe that there's inflation coming in the United States, is the demand for the metal itself by Chinese and Indian buyers. That tells me that the newly wealthy, the nouveau riche, there must be a fancy Mandarin word for this, do not trust the government, do not trust the forecast from Beijing, and they're holding physical gold, holding it in Singapore, where you visited it, holding in Japan, for offshore accounts, holding it in Taiwan. That tells me that the Chinese people, absent the party, are very shrewd. They see what's happening.
Well, they certainly do, because, they can see that their government is not dealing effectively with inflation, which is their number one problem. And we have to point out again that it was not a downturn that got the people out into the streets in 1989. It was the mismanagement of growth, specifically inflation.
Later on tonight, Gordon and I are going to address the fact that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is talking tough these days, talking tough in all directions, while it's soft-selling itself to the United States. Gordon, do you believe at this point that the People's Liberation Army is preparing to assert its authority just because it can see what we're talking about, that there will be disorder with this level of inflation?
And certainly they see the erosion of civilian authority. They've also have realized that the civilians need the troops of the People's Liberation Army to maintain order in China. So essentially, we've got some very powerful flag officers who are now disrespecting the most senior civilian leaders. We've never seen this before.
That's what we're going to talk about in specific. So those remarks by the senior flag officers that we would regard as impudent and strangely political, those have weight in China because of the disregard of Wen Jiabao and Hu Jintao.
Right. I mean, that's a firing offense. I mean, Stanley McChrystal got fired for nothing compared to what Chinese generals and admirals have been saying in the last several months.
He didn't even say it. It just appeared in Rolling Stone. And that was enough
that's right.
to panic the White House. Wen Jiabao and Hu Jintao are not panicking, not because they're confident, but because they're without power.
And they're very insecure.
We're talking about inflation. It's not your problem. You're not going to go buy cookies tonight that have doubled overnight. But the people in China, and there are 500 million people who do not have adequate money to pay for this inflation, are seeing it every day in the marketplace. And also the people in China who have money are buying physical gold. Inflation is the problem in China. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com and The Daily. I'm John Batchelor.